This is the Rcbap portion of our training today. That Rcbap stands for Residential Condominium Building Association Policy. The Rcbap form is similar to the dwelling and the GP forms that we've already covered. We're just going to discuss the different requirements when dealing with an Rcbap claim. We've gone over the qualifications. You got to be able to prepare an accurate scope of damage and dollar estimates of $1 million or more. Many times these losses can exceed $1 million. And many times the policy limits are several $1 million based on the replacement cost of these condo buildings. A building owned and administered as a condo containing one or more family units where at least 75% of the floor area is residential. That is a residential condo building. Again, we have to have 75% of the square footage residential space. Otherwise, this would need to be insured under a general property form. So as the adjuster, first of all, verify that there's a general condition of flooding. Second of all, when you make the call, identify who you're going to be meeting with. Tell them to have their condo docs available. When you get there, make sure that 75% of the square floor area is, the square foot area of the floor is residential for them to be adequately and properly insured under the Rcbap form. Here's an example for you. We have 3 floors. 2 floors are residential, 1 is commercial. We know right away we don't have 75%. This would need to be handled under a general property form. If you got this under an Rcbap, you're going to need to submit an underwriting alert and an action request document to have this amended. Here we have 4 floors, 3 of which are residential. That tells us 75%, so we know this would be correctly identified as an Rcbap policy. This one is 50-50. We don't have 75. We need to be a general property. And again, 75%. So we're hammering this home to you because it is important. 99.99% of all condos carry an Rcbap. They carry the master policy. 99.99%. We've done the math. It's accurate. Really, we haven't. But we're trying to tell you that so many times these condos carry a master policy. And that's important because if you go out as an adjuster and you have a dwelling form and you have a unit owner claim, you might be inclined to make a recommendation for building damages under that unit owner claim. However, as we mentioned in the very first section, if there's an Rcbap or a master policy in place, all damages will be paid under that master policy. If you make a recommendation and it gets paid under a dwelling form and it's later found out to have an Rcbap, that will be an overpayment, it will be an error, and we will be on the hook for that payment. If you're working a condo unit owner's claim, make sure that you know the Rcbap will pay the building damages unless there is no Rcbap in place. If there is no Rcbap in place, to document that, you need a current condo association letterhead dated currently with a statement that clearly outlines there is no master policy carried by the association. Don't recommend payment for unit owner claims without discussion for your examiner first. So when we say the 99.99%, if you're in a restricted zone or a special flood hazard area, I bet that number is pretty accurate because an insurance or an agency will absolutely let their client know that you cannot rely on all of the individual unit owners to carry policies. As a master association, you will have to carry a policy to ensure that all of the damages, the building damages, would be covered under a master policy. So if there's a special flood hazard area, they will have a master policy. We've got a letter on our dash. This is a condo unit owner's explanation of coverage. It's available to adjusters, so if you have a unit owner claim, we've gone over this before, make sure and print this out. Carry these with you. This can explain to the insured why they carry a policy, why it's important they continue to carry a policy, and explain their policy coverage to them. When you're working an Rcbap, you got to inspect all the units. We have to know because the units can be differently built out from one to the other. They can vary in the additions and any upgrades, built-ins, from one to the next. They might not receive the same amount of payment. We also have to see the damages to all the areas. We now have to get all pages of the condo docs. So when I mentioned upon that first call to ask for those, the the association representative will understand what you're asking for. Go ahead and tell them to get you all copies of that, scan them all in, get those uploaded separately because typically the scan can be pretty large. Go ahead and upload them separately as receipts and documentation. Do that initially. They're in the file. You shouldn't have to address those again. It's required to show that the building is declared a condominium in the state that it's in. So we see there's a lot of things that it outlines, but more than anything, it shows us this is a residential condominium form of ownership in the state that our loss is in. If that insured, if you've got a dwelling form and the insured tells you, the unit owner tells you there's no Rcbap in place, got to have that letter, absolutely. So Deborah is a resident at Sunset Condos. The condo association does carry an Rcbap policy. She carries a dwelling policy for her unit. So when all the condos flooded, Deborah filed a claim to pay for the damages for her interior unit, for all the walls and the floors that she put in at her own expense. However, the only time that her policy would kick in, even though she put those things in at her expense, is if that master policy had been exhausted. It's rare that that happens. Now, if a condo unit owner purchases personal property coverage, you can apply 10% to additions not covered under the master policy. This is a good narrative. The reason we have this narrative along with this diagram is to show you these buildings. These are condo buildings. There was a situation here where these were underinsured. So on a condo, you have to carry 80% of the replacement cost of the building. You have to. Or you have to carry $250,000 per unit. If you're not carrying those amounts or you're not insured to 80% of the replacement cost, you're going to have a co-insurance penalty. In this instance, our adjuster was pretty sure there was going to be a co-insurance penalty. He worked out a detailed valuation after completing a detailed sketch, and guess what? There was a penalty. He went through and explained in each unit what the differences were from one unit to the next, what the different finishes were. He detailed in his diagram that there was a one-story section, a two-story section, and a garage section. He assigned a square foot value and a unit cost to each one of those to verify that final number that he had. So we're working with dollars and cents that the insured is not going to receive because they have a penalty. When you're doing that, we have to be as accurate as we can. That's why we have the detailed valuation, that's why we have the detailed narrative, and that's why we have this very detailed diagram to back up the adjuster's decision to apply a co-insurance penalty. The entire building is covered under one policy when you have the Rcbap. The common areas, individually owned areas, any improvements, and any contents that are owned in common in the common areas, those are all under the Rcbap. Personal property owned by an individual unit owner would be under a dwelling, okay? This is one of the largest losses we ever worked. This building had 3 wings to it. The wing that came out onto the beach was damaged by storm surge, and you can see that the entire thing, the surge caused erosion that caused the entire wing to settle. This was not subsidence done on a gradual level. This was done rapidly. The engineer came out and said this was as a result of flood. Unfortunately, we were not allowed to estimate the entire building. They had to tear the entire building down, but we're looking at a direct damage policy, so the adjuster was able to write up the entire wing here, and this was one of the largest losses, and I believe it still is the largest loss we ever worked, and the adjuster was in the 6 digits for his payment for this claim. We did have to get an engineer. Make sure that you understand assessment coverage. Assessment coverage applies to a building property that's covered by the SFIP. Many times assessments are for swimming pools, for the equipment there, hot tubs, for items in the parking lot, for items of landscaping. More times than not, those damages that are not covered, the damages for them is assessed to each individual unit owner. So we have to understand the assessment coverage and when it applies. Association assessment to unit owners made to recover a deductible are not covered. Association assessments to unit owners made for items that are not covered in the policy are also not covered. Make sure you're aware of those. Here's the co-insurance we were discussing earlier. We will impose a penalty on loss payment unless the amount of insurance applicable to the building is 80% of the replacement cost or the maximum amount of insurance, which we know is $250,000. I'm going to give you an example of this. It's a drastic example, but it will hammer home the idea. So let's say we have a 2-unit building. This is a $10 million building comprised of 2 units. The maximum amount carried or allowed to be carried on this building is $500,000. You can carry $250,000 per unit, so they can only carry $500,000. If they're carrying $500,000, we know that's woefully under the $8 million, which is 80%. However, we're not going to apply a penalty because they're carrying the maximum amount allowable. As soon as they're not carrying the maximum amount allowable, let's say they're carrying $499,000, we then revert back to the amount that they should carry, which is $8 million. In this instance, we would have a massive coinsurance penalty, and we'll show you what that looks like. So the coinsurance penalty worksheet is in Excel format. We have this on our dashboard for you. It's plug and play. You put in the number of units, you put in the amount of insurance available, the amount they carry, and the rest of this will spit out an answer to you where at the end, after you put in the deductible, will tell you the amount owed to the insured. It calculates this for you, but it's very simple math. We're talking about fourth grade math. The amount of insurance carried divided by the amount you should carry times the loss less the deductible equals the amount payable. And here you can see that. The insured must carry the amount equal to the RCV. So in this instance, let's just say, in example A, if 90% coinsurance is involved, $120,000 is the replacement cost of the building. They're required to carry $108,000. They're only carrying $85,000. So we apply that penalty to the loss. They're only going to get $8,400 here when the loss is 12. Here's another example for you. Let's look at C. 70% coinsurance is involved. 120,000 times 0.7. They're required to carry 84,000. They're carrying 85. They get the entire amount less their deductible because they were insured to value. Determine the maximum amount of insurance allowable. Look at the number of units times 250,000, and you will see if there's going to be a penalty involved. Do they carry the maximum allowable? Are they insured to 80%? If the answer is no to both of these, a penalty will be applied. You're going to use the worksheet that we provide you, and it will tell you the amount that needs to be applied. As with the general property form, if you are not qualified, if you are not certified or authorized to work a loss of this nature, make sure you raise your hand right away. It will be evident very quickly if you're not qualified to work one of these. We can help you with them. We want you to be certified in this, but however, we've got to make sure that this loss is handled correctly. If it's above your pay grade, we can give you another loss that you can work, and we'll give this to an adjuster who's available to work this and who's qualified to work this. We might even let you work it, again, with a trainer's supervision. That way you've got some experience under your belt, and going forward, you could probably get certified to work one of these, but let us know as soon as possible. To calculate the amount of the coinsurance penalty, as I mentioned, the amount carried over the amount you should carry, multiplied by the loss less the deductible. It's very, very simple math. The maximum amount of building coverage that can be purchased on a high-rise or low-rise condo is the lesser of at least 80% of the replacement cost, times 250 of the units in the building. Look at these. How many units do we have here? Some of these buildings are going to be $20 or $30 million. And you can imagine if there's a coinsurance penalty involved, that there would be there could be considerable loss to the insured. And you need to know what you're doing here, so we can help you if you have questions. This insured has got 12 units in the building. 12 units times 250, he can carry $3 million. If he's carrying $3 million, even if it's a $10 million building, he's going to be fine. No coinsurance would apply. Coinsurance does not apply to contents in any way. Condos do come in all shapes and sizes. These are Jersey condos. We called them that because after Hurricane Sandy, we probably had a few hundred of these. They look like duplexes. Anywhere else in the world, they would be duplexes. Due to the nature of the government in New Jersey, they required these to be condos. So they were 2-unit condos. One side was a guy who was the unit association representative, and the other was just a guy who was at the mercy of his neighbor. You know, more times than not, we hope they would get along, and if they didn't, I can imagine some of these were pretty sticky, but condos can come in all shapes and sizes. When you see a building like this, you got to determine the ownership. Is it a townhome? Is it a condo? Do they have the association? You know, what do they have?